In my world there is music and good vibes and laughter and lovers, adventure and friendship. We know who we are.
Welcome to Be the Wellness Podcast, where we help you master your body, mind, and the experience of life through insightful conversation, interviews with experts and thought leaders, all with a side of marital banter and some good old-fashioned humor.
Yes, we are your hosts, Adam and Vanessa Lambert, and we're committed to helping you live life fully expressed physically, mentally, and experientially. Sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and join the conversation. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Be the Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Vanessa Lambert, and I got this other guy over here, Adam Lambert. He's hanging out too.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk on this one.
I'm
just going to scoff.
It's going to be a solo cast with a side of judgment.
Exactly. So carry on.
You know what? I have an announcement to make.
What is it?
You are way less grumpy than you used to be.
Yeah, well, I sleep more.
That's true, right?
Yeah.
It's so true. So I don't know if you guys know this, but this has been an ongoing point of contention / joke in our house, is that Adam gets a little grumpy at times.
Yeah.
And, for not really any apparent reason, to be fair.
Well,
But now that you mention it, you're right. You were lacking in sleep for the
22
first
years.
22 years that I knew you. And you're like so much happier now.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a big difference, man. It's like consistently getting sleep
Yeah.
we talk about it all the time. It's the underpinning to, health, happiness, all the things that go along with it.
And a happy relationship.
Yeah, it turns out, it's no joke. All of these processes that everybody talks about taking place when you actually sleep and get the right kind of sleep, full phase, deep sleep, all of the things and enough of it makes your brain work better.
Well, and it's not even just grumpiness. It's actually like, that was something that obviously we talk about and was part of like your deal. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that I noticed,
it's just part of this deal.
It's this thing. It's this
he lives
shtick.
in a garbage can. Yeah.
But the other thing is that like your ability to let things just roll off your shoulders.
Yeah.
Slide off your sleeve. Slither off your...
Right.
Whatever.
I'm slipperier.
You're slipperier. Yeah,
Yeah.
slipperier. Yeah. And I just think that that's really interesting because, it's, again, one of those things that, like, I've just noticed in the last year with you. It's just suddenly you're just way more chillax about stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I can explain how that works.
Let's hear it.
Yeah. So, what it comes down to is the part of your brain that tempers impulsive behavior, right? And so, like, reacting to something is an impulse, right? Just in a similar way to like buying gummy worms on the way out of Target, right? Is an impulse.
Right.
The part of your brain that does that allows you to make rational decisions and like put that space between the thought and the action requires a lot of energy.
Right.
And
this is in the prefrontal cortex.
It is. Yeah. And when you're tired,
you don't have the energy.
You don't have the energy, and there's, and that's, it's kind of where hangry comes from. It's where a lot of that stuff sort of bubbles up. But when you're chronically sleep deprived, there's a bunch of different things that go on. But the studies are kind of starting to point to some of this more specifically in firefighters, because suicide rates are going up, and they're starting to actually kind of track some of this. And sleep is a massive component, and there's a bunch of different things going on that I don't think we fully understand all of it yet. But the end result is this decreased ability to control your impulses, coupled with potentially like almost like resistance to dopamine, right? So like the parts of your brain that that keep you interested and keep you engaged in what's going on, like some of that stuff seems to be hampered, so you're like less interested in what's going on. You have less impulse control, and You know what it's like? We know babies, right? Babies
Yeah.
don't sleep, they cry. It's the same thing with humans. You've just tamped it all down.
Right.
Or humans. I guess babies are humans too.
With full-grown humans.
Regular ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's true. And right, exactly. You just train yourself not to cry, but then you display your dissatisfaction essentially with the way you feel in other ways.
Yeah.
And those emotional, boils, if you will, are going to be be
Boils?
boils. Yeah.
Like skin boils or
no.
like
I was
bubbling
thinking
up?
like bubbled boils.
Okay, right.
Like-
I mean, either way, it's like, it works.
Either way, it's not. Yeah, it's a word that says yuck. Yeah. So it's a much more pleasant experience to be around you.
Yeah. Well,
Thank
and
you.
then you're also like way less annoying, which is great. And so I don't know which it is. Like it could be
When you
it
sleep
could be
more,
that
I'm
I
less
sleep
annoying.
more. Yeah, it's weird. It's like Finley says with surfing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys ever notice when I go inside, the waves get a lot bigger? Yeah, it's all perspective.
Yeah, it is all perspective. So anyway, we thought in this episode we would just catch up with you guys, talk about how awesome Adam is now and how less annoying I am. And just kind of, tap back in with you guys. We've been doing a lot of traveling, a lot of stuff going on. Obviously, we had our big road trip over to Montana, which we never really had a chance to talk about.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning of a podcast a while back, I think, with the Forest Bather.
Oh, yeah, we did. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've been on the road just kind of learning more about ourselves and more about our business. And every time we step away, we just get more perspective, right? And as your business grows, your focus changes and, you start to just look at some of the things that are coming into light and some of the things that, maybe are fading into the background. And it's just always interesting to kind of reassess where things are headed and where your commitments are and all that good stuff. So for us, it's been a great little break and little kind of, I don't want to say like check-in, but in a way, just a space. Sometimes you need space to kind of see where things are at. And we've been giving ourselves the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
And so we quit.
Last podcast episode.
So we're out of here. No, but really in reality, what it comes down to is just always questioning, how can you make a bigger difference? How can you connect with people? How can you really show up in the way that lights you up, that really inspires you? And one of those things for us is always the adventures and the retreats and just creating experience for people. Because, if you're trying to create something, you're trying to create a business or you're trying to create an offering around something that you're not intrinsically excited about, that does not spark joy, right? It's really hard to pull that off long term. You really can't pull the wool over your audience's eyes or your own. Eventually the well from which you need to keep this thing going is going to be depleted. And if you don't have an intrinsic, commitment or excitement for the types of things that you're doing, the well will run dry.
Yeah, totally. It's not, there's some industries where, of course, you can just continue to plod along, right? If you're making widgets or like spreadsheets or something, like nobody can really tell how much enthusiasm you put into that spreadsheet, right? As long as it checks all the, boxes, so to speak. And this, this spreadsheet performs as it should. But when it comes to coaching and when it comes to being, a catalyst for transformation in people's lives, whether it's through nutrition or strength and conditioning or mindfulness and mindset or, whatever, all the things that we do, it's pretty apparent if you don't care anymore. You know what I mean? Or if you're not excited, care is not the right word, but if you're not excited about it anymore, it shows up. So
absolutely.
It's important to kind of do that, right? To just go back through. And I think often when we do these sort of little, check-ins on us and what we were feeling about our business, we come back to, oh no, this actually does still excite me, or like this part of it does. And it would be, what I would really like is to do it like this. And this is just kind of how we continue to evolve.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
cool.
absolutely. And I think that, for me personally, it's been, I started my Authentic Self program, I think 4 or 5 years ago now. It must be 4 years because we're 5 years, or I don't know. I've lost track.
I think it was 3 years ago.
3 years? Okay.
Yeah.
3 years. So, it's been really interesting running that program and seeing, how much joy is still sparked for me in the process of teaching that curriculum and watching people's lives transform. And I think that for me, one of the things that became apparent in this last year is just how much I love actually coaching more in person. So for a long time, our programs were really primarily online, but we didn't have coaching calls and we didn't have really any of that sort of in-person touch point. And this last year I added in coaching calls to Authentic Self, and it just was so cool. I just realized how much I loved actually getting to connect with people in person. And
be able to see their faces and talk to them, right?
Exactly.
Via Zoom or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. As in person as you'd get in the world of online coaching.
Right.
Yeah. But like actually having that FaceTime with folks and really, getting to know them on a deeper level, really, because you're actually seeing them in person, you're making eye contact, or you're seeing their expressions and you're feeling their emotion. It just really impacted me, and I really loved the experience of sharing in that way.
Yeah.
And so that has kind of, created a whole new awakening for me with Authentic Self, which is going to be launching again pretty soon. I'm just wrapping up this year's course and getting ready to launch the brand new version of Authentic Self again, a much more condensed version, which is really exciting. Just making it a little bit more accessible and a little bit more easier for folks, but really focusing on that connection in person and that coaching in person. And I've also just launched a mastermind. So for my Authentic Self graduates, an opportunity for them to continue their coaching and go even deeper into their process and really create an even higher touch point of coaching with them. And I'm really, really excited about that.
Yeah.
I'm actually like so
Super
excited.
excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, I just think over years of being a coach, what you realize is that if you can make a difference for people in the way that they think about themselves and the way that they relate to reality, you have actually cracked the code in a way that is far beyond, a program or sticking to a diet or, following some strict regimented thing. Because what you've created is, it's like, give a man a fish or teach them to fish, right? You've given them an opening to create their reality in a new way. And that sparks so much joy for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. If you can tap into that, that's the place to be. And I think, especially with Authentic Self, because, so like with Roadmap, and we're dealing so specifically with diet and almost even more specifically with fat loss, because that's just what most people are interested in. But the thing that I think is really cool about Authentic Self is that it's super broad. I mean, you have folks who are working on starting a business, folks who are working on internal relationships, folks who are working on just relating with some, job or whatever that they have. And those are the problems that they're trying to solve. But what I think is really powerful about it, and especially in the mastermind, is getting to see that the struggles or the problems that people are trying to solve, regardless of whether it's starting a business or interpersonal relationships or whatever, they're the same problems.
Totally.
They have the same underlying hangups and the same process to go through to sort them out, and that, like, understanding that kind of stuff can be so wildly empowering. Just to see that, oh no, my problem is not unique, and that, because I think that's a trap people can get into, right? You're like, I have this problem and no one knows how to solve it. And my problem is unique in that it's this, and this, and it might be in the details of it. But when you look at the underlying cause, it's often very similar, and it's super powerful to be able to see that bubbling up in other people's circumstances,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And to be able to see your reflection in the others around you, right? And that's the amazing thing about this group dynamic, is that you see it click, you see folks like, oh, this is my issue, but then they can see themselves in another. And what's really amazing, and this is one of the reasons that the mastermind for me is a really exciting expansion of this, is that we learn so much from each other. So when I hear you talk about your issue and the way it occurs to you, it's really easy for me to be like, oh, well, duh, you just Like, just,
Do
I mean,
X, Y, or
don't
Z.
worry about this,
Yeah.
or like, look at it this way. Or, it's really easy for us to see how easy it is for the other to make a different choice, to choose a different path, to create their relationship to that, concept or issue in a new way. But then when we see it in ourselves, it seems different, unique, special. Like, oh, it can't be as simple as what that person's
Right.
thing
Oh
is.
man, I wish I had your problems. They're so easy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But after a while, you start to see that, oh yeah, all of our problems are actually pretty similar. And you start to see like, okay, well, if I'm looking at that person and clearly seeing that they could make a different choice that would slightly shift their experience in a new and positive way, like it gives you this greater self-reflection of like, how could I do that in my life? And I think that it's so powerful to learn in that mirror sort of like, I don't know. Yeah. When you're mirroring each other and seeing sort of the reflection of how things are for other people.
Yeah. Well, it's just always easier to point out the problems that other people are, or the things other people are doing wrong, right?
Right,
You're like,
like
oh,
how-
I see exactly what you're doing wrong. And you're
Right.
like, right.
Like, I'm like, you're grumpy. And you're like, no, you're annoying.
Both are true.
Both are true.
Yeah, it's funny.
But both can also be not true if you
Yeah.
just decide to make them not true.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, super excited about some new changes in that. And, just feeling, it's an interesting time. A lot of people are really being pulled to this self-work, to this self-discovery. And I just find that we're in such a cool, unique time where people are really primed for this kind of information and
Yeah.
they're open. Whereas before, I think people used to think that if they're working on themselves, then that means they have to admit something's wrong.
Right.
They have to admit they're not good enough or they're doing it wrong or like all of the story that comes with that. But I think nowadays people are really just looking at like, okay, great. Here's where I'm at. How can I optimize this experience to be even better?
Yeah.
And it's just a really cool time that we're in,
Yeah. Yeah. That is cool. There's also something else going on.
which is what?
It's hard to know exactly what the deal is, but it's like we were talking about this last night. It's like the biggest Mercury retrograde scenario that's ever existed, right?
Right.
And it's a trip because, so we have a lot of friends who are entrepreneurs, and almost everyone is experiencing some sort of chaos in their business right now. And a high percentage of our friends are experiencing some kind of chaos in their personal lives right now. And you look at, well, the state of California is experiencing a pretty significant crisis right now,
Right.
up and down the state. And there's something going on right now that is like the struggle meteor passed by, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or something. And it's really interesting to kind of take note of that and see what all is out there and what people are coming up against right now. And then to your point that you were just making, the choices that they're making around solving that, to me, and I don't know if it's just because I'm more involved in this space than I've ever been, this space of self-help or self-improvement or whatever, but it sure does seem like a higher percentage of people are looking to themselves and looking within to solve these problems than, blaming someone else or wishing that someone would fix this problem once and for all. And if only X, Y, or Z would happen, And I think it's cool. So it's like we're in this period of just mass chaos, and yet a higher percentage of people seem to be looking at themselves as the first thing to change, which I think is fantastic. I think it's like also just totally necessary,
Right. Well, they say there must be chaos before a star is born, right? So
Do they?
Yeah, they do. Nietzsche actually says it.
Good old Nietzsche.
But, it speaks to the fact that there does have to be almost this like mass incubation phase where there's all of this energy moving and all of this, idea or experience or thought or, expectation or what have you. And it's all moving around. But eventually, like something gets spit out that really is appropriate, or that is a new beginning or a new possibility or a new thing. And it's like this delicate balance of chaos meets surrender. And so it's like you almost have to get into the chaos. You almost have to like experience the chaos so that you are deeply encouraged to surrender.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you can fight it, but it's, you know, it's like these fires. You can fight it and you can, you know, do all the things you can to combat the energy. But at the end of the day, like that chaos is going to do what it wants to do.
Yeah.
And you're really going to have to surrender to the fact that like, okay, let's get out of the way and let this thing do what it's going to do and make a difference where we can, you know, make the small adjustments where we do have control. But ultimately, like we have to surrender to the bigger thing at hand, the bigger star that is being born.
Yeah.
And I think that that is what we are experiencing to a large degree. And it's interesting that, you know, especially in California where a lot of new ideas do emerge and a lot of people are forward thinking and often have, you know, are more adaptable to new ideas. And it's very interesting that like all of this chaos is happening almost on a grand scale. And I'm curious to see
what comes out of it.
Yeah. What star is born, especially, you know, we've got PG&E, they're doing they're turning power off throughout the state because of the high winds and, you know, trying to avoid more fire starting because of the down power lines. And so what we're realizing is like there are archaic systems that exist that don't work for the way that the world is now.
Right.
And that is like, obviously you can point to that as a thing actually happening here in California, but it's actually on a larger scale. I mean, if you look at that, that is a story on a global scale. Like we have archaic systems that aren't fitting the dynamic of this world that we're emerging into. And so I think it's really interesting. And PG&E and this whole thing is a great sort of like just, you know, microcosm.
Yeah.
You know, they say what's in the microcosm is in the macrocosm, right? So it's like
it's a narrow experiment to look at a much broader
exactly
you know, issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel like, you know, there's a lot of unsurety. Is that a word?
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty.
I think. Yeah.
You know, I love to make up words. Like, is that a word? Uncertainty about where we're headed, right? And I think that you know, you can feel that at an interpersonal level with the people around you and the way that things are right now. There's like a lot of insecurity, but I know unsurety isn't a word, but I want it to be because it's not insecurity.
Well, people are just unsure.
We're unsure. Yeah, unsurety feels good to me. I want to use it.
I mean, it's your podcast. You know?
It's my podcast. I want to make up words. I'm seriously. I think there's ones that are missing. But, you know, I feel like people are just experiencing this, like we're not sure where we're headed, but yet we know we can't remain where we are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah. And yeah, it'll be, you know, so it's easy to talk about the fires because it's something that I know a lot about and it's top of mind in California right now, but it really just is that circumstance, you know, and people like to talk about, I mean, and it's super popular in the media and everything right now of, oh my God, the fires are all of a sudden exponentially worse. And they really aren't. It's been a slow and relatively steady increase. It's just that now we've reached a point where it's really difficult to manage what all is here, you know? So I wouldn't say that it's this massive, sharp, like hockey stick kind of graph of what's going on. We've just hit the point where we can't deal with them as effectively as we used to be able to, right? So it's now becoming like, oh man, it seems really bad now. And it's like, it's been getting bad for a while, you know?
Yeah.
But it's, you know, and I think we've talked about this before, like the thing that I enjoyed the most about that job were times like right now, where it's just pure chaos. I mean, and it is pushing you to your absolute ability, physically and mentally, to deal with the problem that is there. It's like, it's the crack of the fire service, you know, it's like, this is what we trained for, you know,
right.
And it was like my favorite thing. And it's terrible because obviously it's like causing the most damage and, you know, the most people are affected by it and all that kind of stuff. But it's also like the time where you just get to do what you do, you know? And I think what I can see starting to emerge from all of this is that there used to be time for people to forget about how bad it is when it's bad. And now we don't get that time, you know? So now I think things are going to start to change because, you know, we're a 24/7 news society, right? It's like, what's the next thing? What's the next
Right.
thing? What's the next thing? You only get 5 or 6 things deep before you forgot about the first
The
thing,
old
right?
news cycle, right?
Yeah. And now it's top of mind all the time,
Right.
you know, and there's so much pressure to make something, you know, change that I think it's going to have to. And, you know, I think, to a large degree, everybody's just looking for something to blame, right? So PG&E, of course, is going to take a beating on this, just like SDG&E and SoCal Edison and all, you know, all the other utilities in Southern California did in 2003 and 2007. You're going to see the same cycle occur, but now it just keeps happening. You know, there's not 10-year gaps between these massive catastrophic events anymore. And so something's going to give, you know, and it's going to be, I'm excited to see what comes of it, honestly. And this is like my own weird thing of like, you know, we actually, when we were playing that game when we were on the boat a couple of weeks ago, there was the questions, right? And it was like, was it, how do you want to die? Or something like if you could pick how you wanted to die.
I think so.
And my answer was like, I want to be like standing on a mountain watching the meteor that destroys all of humanity as you know it come in. Like I like that kind of chaos and just like, holy shit, this place is out of control is fascinating to me, you know? And so I'm excited about the whole thing. I'm like, okay,
excited about,
it's all getting crazy. Yeah. You know, it's like, it's all getting so crazy, but out of it is going to be what's next, you know? And so, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that, like, you know, this is, it's interesting because it's kind of just a spiritual time for everybody, even if they don't look at it through that lens. It kind of is like a quote unquote come to Jesus moment where like everyone's sort of really starting to delineate what's truly important to them.
Yeah.
You know, like it's funny. We were just at this party and we were at this, you know, huge house and it was looking at this person's lifestyle and thinking about, you know, if I would want that, if I would want to create that for myself, like, is that something that would be interesting to me or whatever? And it's interesting just to be in a time now where I think like if you were in the baby boomer era, right? Every single person would say they'd want a big mansion. They'd want, you know, grandiose everything. Like there was this very sort of the bigger, the better kind of idealism about everything. And you can see it really in the mentality of folks that are, you know, maybe 60 and above versus the millennials that now they don't dream of, you know, 14-bedroom mansions or whatnot. Like there, it's not that like something has changed in the ether of what is special about being human. That now they, you know, would want to like learn. They'd want to have a house that was like fully functioning and composting and, you know, fully sustainable or whatever. There's like different dreams emerging from the new energy and the new mindset of people. And I just think it's really interesting to see how important it is for like old ideas to die and new ideas to emerge because like it is appropriate for the change of energy and the change of the world. And if you think about it, like we're in a point right now where an emergence of people who only want, you know, multi-million-dollar huge mansions, it wouldn't be appropriate for like what we're facing as a society right now.
Right.
And you can see that like that idea and that sort of goal seems to be declining. It doesn't mean that some people still don't want it.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
I'm not even judging people who do, but you can see in the collective consciousness that like people are just naturally shifting away from it because it almost feels old. Like it doesn't feel like a fresh, vibrant, new ideology that people want to be born into. It's kind of like,
well, it's minimalism. You know, kind of a thing too, but on a broader scale than just, you know, only having one couch and one fork. Or whatever, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's just really interesting to see the change in consciousness and psyche and the way that people are sort of really evaluating what is important to them. And I think it's like, again, it's all coming from this chaos energy of people just realizing like, all right, what do I really care about? What's really important? What do I want to spend my precious life energy on? Do I want to work at some job I hate for 30 years so I can add more doors in my house? Or do I want to have like the amount of doors that makes me feel, comfortable, but then I can still live the vibrant, like, creation that my soul wants to express? And I just think it's really cool to see that change happening.
What is the vibrant creation that your soul wants to express?
What is the vibrant creation of my soul?
Somebody should create like a questionnaire so you can figure out what that is. There probably is one if you Google it.
Google it.
Yeah. So the thing that's interesting to me about all this, and I can't remember when this was in school, but at some point in school in a biology class, we watched this video called Daisy World. And it was like 5 minutes long or something, but it just looked at the Earth, as this planet that's covered in white daisies. And as the white reflected the heat, the Earth got too cold and the daisies turned dark. And then the dark daisies attracted or absorbed more heat, and they got too hot for the black daisies, so they turned white. And it's just this constant ebb and flow and reaction that takes longer than people realize, and it happens slower than we have the lens to see, if that makes sense. So if we zoom out on the time and like the time change continuum, right?
Right.
It totally makes sense. But when you're in it day to day, you can't see that these white daisies were black before, and
Right.
the reason they're white now is because they were black, and so now they're going to turn black again, and then they're going to be white again. You can't see that because we're too in it, right? And when we see this in arguments, you know what I mean? It happens at every single level of our existence. If you can just pull back from it and get a little bit of separation from the problem, you can see it. When you're in it, you can't. And I just think that it's super interesting and I tap back into that Daisy World moment a lot, just thinking about what's going on in the world and how everything is changing and how it's just like, man, maybe this is how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's just supposed to change. And does that make your life better or worse? That's totally up to you, but this is just how it's going to be forever.
Right. Oh, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that is the one thing we can say for sure, is that everything will change. And it doesn't even mean for the better, for the worse, but it definitely will change.
Yeah.
Like, things like to move, things like to be in motion. I mean, even the universe itself is in constant motion, constant change. And it doesn't necessarily mean as it grows that it becomes a better thing.
Right.
It just
We
grows.
can't even know, right?
Yeah, we don't, yeah.
What's the space thing at the
dark matter.
Dark matter, right?
Yeah.
At the Museum of Natural History, right? So we just went and watched this thing again. And there's a part in there that just, it's like, it breaks your mind to try to like think about this. And that's this idea that the universe is expanding faster and faster in every direction, regardless of where you are in the universe. So if I'm right here, it's expanding away from me.
Yeah.
And from where you are, it's expanding away from you.
Right.
And that wouldn't change if we were 200 million light years to the left. It would still be expanding away from you.
Yeah. That,
What the fuck?
I don't understand. Like, it goes against all of the rules of physics that we understand.
Well, it probably doesn't. We just don't understand.
We don't understand. Yeah.
We don't know that math. Like, somebody figured that out. But it's like, okay, so if we don't even have a grasp on how that works, how can we possibly be getting super worried about, your neighbor's dog barking? I don't know. Like, it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, no, it's definitely interesting. And I think that, all of us really, at the end of the day, though, it really comes back to like that internal journey, that like taking that time, zooming back out, like just pulling yourself away from being so deeply embedded into your moment that you can see things from a different perspective, and you can keep reminding yourself to see things from a different perspective. Like just keep pulling yourself back. And, the more practice you get at pulling yourself out of that really zoomed in tunnel vision, the easier it gets. And I would say arguably the easier life gets.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the difference between being in the head of the fire versus like being on the sidelines, like you can stand on the sidelines and sure you're going to feel the heat, but you're going to be able to see from a greater perspective of like the direction it's heading and how you can get out of the way and how you can work with it. So like, to cause the least damage in your life and how to relate to it. And it's just, I think it's really important that we as a society right now just keep reminding ourselves to zoom out.
Yeah. Zoom out, get a 30,000 foot view, because it all makes sense from there.
It does.
You're like, oh, I see what's going to happen.
and the point is, none of it matters.
Yeah. Oh, so okay.
The joke's on us.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's on the people who worry the most. That's for sure.
Totally.
But all right. So I got a PSA about Twitter.
Okay.
So our good friend Nadia is like the only person I know who's on Twitter consistently. And she's always talking about Twitter, and she's always sending me, like, she and I have an ongoing banter, I think is probably the best word about it, around politics, because we just have like almost as far, well, it's like a horseshoe scenario with us, right? Like we're so far apart that we're actually closer together on the political spectrum.
You're actually becoming closer and closer.
Yeah,
all the
well,
time.
She's coming around.
That's what she says about you. That's pretty funny.
Well, I know, but I think this is the point: is that we're closer together than we realized from the beginning because we're using all of these labels and stuff. Anyway, so she finally has coerced me into Twitter, and since I got there, I'm realizing that it is probably the problem that we have with communication. It is insane what kind of concepts and higher level thinking and things that try to get explained in 120 characters or whatever on Twitter. It's mind blowing what goes on there. And so I've been keeping an eye on the fires and stuff in California because for whatever reason, like, I think so. My nephew James is now working for Cal Fire. He started as a seasonal firefighter this year, and I think because of that, I've kind of tapped back into it and I like pay more attention to it. And I'm keenly aware of this like syndrome that happens when you retire from the fire department and then you like nerd out on it and comment on stuff on social media. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to become that guy. But it's interesting to just sort of be in this perspective and see what goes on. So I've been keeping an eye on this stuff on Twitter and watching some of the comments and the stuff that gains traction. I mean, so this is the crazy thing about Twitter. So somebody can say something, whatever it is, and then it gets retweeted and it gets a hashtag added to it. And then next thing you know, that whatever they said is like trending in like what some people consider a news source,
right?
About these fires. And we used to talk about this all the time when I was still in the job of how dangerous that can be because people get misleading information, especially when it comes to areas that are under evacuation. So-and-so just went home, and the next thing you know, everybody and their brother starts going home, and they should still be under evacuation. Or these areas are evacuated, these ones aren't. And you need to have like a trusted source that's putting out that sort of information. And social media, Twitter especially, is one of those ways of doing it, but it's hard to manage, right? There's just all this crazy stuff going on. And so something that has been trending in the Twitter sphere around the fires in California is this story that the state of California prison system, the CDC, puts inmates to work fighting fire in a forced labor situation. Meaning that we just go in and round up the inmates that are in prison and we make them go out here and fight fires, put their lives in line and blah, 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 And it's really, really misleading. And it gets a lot of traction. Like I saw this comment and I was like, whatever, And then looking back through a thread and I said that comment had like 7,000 likes and 250 retweets and all of these comments and stuff where people just piling on about how, oh, I can't believe they're doing that. This is indentured servitude and this is essentially slave labor and blah, blah, blah. I can't believe they're risking these people's lives and all this stuff. I'm like, wow. Doesn't anybody like step in and like correct anyone on here? Does anyone do this? And I was super tempted to just go in and be like, no, this actually isn't how it works, right? Yeah. But I didn't because I was like, I don't want to start getting involved in some kind of Twitter battle. And it's like at the end of the day, it's not my job to do that kind of stuff. But
you could see the problem though, which is that like it's a mob mentality, right?
Yeah, totally. It's this mob mentality with massive misunderstanding about how this stuff works. So this is something that I happen to know about. But think about all the things I don't know about, right? The same kind of things happen. You can get spun into this and be like, oh my God, what they're doing to the, South American tree frogs? This is a terrible situation. We need to do something.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem with news, politics, all of it in general is that like to really understand these issues would take years of understanding the issues, being in the rooms that are making the decisions about these things and understanding the systems that are in place. And I think that that's why, for one, I think why people are so disenfranchised with politics is because all we have are sound bites and mob mentality to go off of. And it's kind of like, well, to really, really deeply understand these things, you almost have to be like dedicated all the full time to researching each of the issues, and it becomes, and then this is the other part is we're all so busy
Yeah.
that it becomes overwhelming. And it's the whole slippery slope of it all, right?
Yeah.
So
it's
Twitter
pretty
did
crazy.
not make you feel more empowered about your stance on politics or on current
it
events.
just really pointed out the problem. Like, honestly, if you want a real snapshot of, I think, why things are so polarized in the United States, I think Twitter's a great place to look.
Yeah.
You'll see it right away. You're like, oh, wow, this is crazy. you know?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So
Well,
anyway, but to set the record straight on inmate firefighters in California,
set
it's a
it straight.
voluntary program. So these guys are in prison, and once they have been in long enough serving with the appropriate good behavior, X, Y, and Z, and they are in for the appropriate kinds of crime, they can qualify for this program where they go out to a fire camp and they get to be outside and work all the time and get trained to fight fire and do all of this kind of stuff. And they get paid. I mean, it's not much. They get paid $1 a day or something, and then $2 an hour when they're on a fire. I mean, it's inconsequential.
Minimal. Right.
But they're out, they're doing stuff, they're learning job skills. They all want to be there.
Oh, yeah.
Like these guys, you go talk to these guys, they're like, oh my God, this is so much better. And
So
the
much
worst,
better.
like the punishment for them is to get sent back into prison.
Yes.
Right? This is how it works. This is not a thing where they're there on their own will. That's the thing. They want to be there. And, one of the other things that gets pointed out is that they get all this training, they go out and they put in all this time and they do all of this work, and then they are ineligible to be hired in a fire department afterwards because they're felons. Also misleading and not quite true, but it happens to be true because in order nowadays to be in the fire department, you have to at least be an EMT, if not a paramedic. And in order to have an emergency medical license of any kind, you can't be a felon.
Right.
So it's not that you can't get hired as a firefighter because you're a felon. It's that you can't get the certificates that you need to be a firefighter because you're a felon. So it's unfortunate. Like what they're saying is true, but it's not the fire department being, come and work for us while you're a prisoner and then we're never going to hire you. It's just not how it works.
Well, and for many, many years, they were eligible for employment and did become firemen and
I worked
firefighters.
with a lot of them.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and it's and that's still totally possible. It's just the emergency medical requirements that change it.
That make it tricky, yeah.
Anyway, that's my inmate firefighter via Twitter PSA.
Thank you for setting the record straight on that. I'm sure
one person is going to, well, you probably inspire some Googling maybe.
Yeah, definitely. Well, this has been a fun episode, catching up, sharing with you folks what's on our minds. We just wanted to really just have a chat. We hear feedback a lot of times that some of people's favorite episodes are when it's just us.
Yeah. So this will be a test.
So this is a test of if that's true. But, we do like to just kind of catch up and share with you what's on our minds, what we're up to, what's in our space. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, a lot of our business is about just connection, community, getting to know each other. And so we like to just, share with you what we're up to, what we're up against. Oftentimes it's not even what we're up to, but what we're grappling with, what we're struggling with, and, what we're finding in our own lives that might be beneficial or useful for other folks out there grappling with the same things.
Yeah. So not Twitter, probably.
But maybe fires.
But maybe fires. Yeah, you never know. And you guys should come to Peru. Because we're going to be there.
We're going to be there, and we could talk
with
even more.
With a lot of other cool people.
Yeah, absolutely. We still have a few spots on the Lara's truck with Adam and I. So if you like this banter, if you like hanging out with us and hearing what we have to say.
You want to hear what it sounds like at altitude.
Then come join us. And if you don't want to hear what it's like at altitude, then come to New Zealand instead.
Yeah, it's much lower.
It is much lower. All right, folks, we love you. This is awesome to connect, and thanks for letting us ramble. We hope that it wasn't too annoying and that you got something out of it, because we sure did.
Yeah, every time.
All right, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.